2 days before my wedding, in a quiet church dressing room, my parents handed me an ultimatum. Take your grandfather off the head table, or we walk out of your rehearsal and your wedding. My father stood there, adjusting his expensive cuffs as if his dignity depended on the sharpness of his crease. He's a retired school janitor, Hannah. He embarrasses us. They thought the absolute worst thing that could happen at my reception was 200 high society guests seeing a man with calloused, work-worn hands sitting next to the bride. They were wrong. What they didn't see coming was what would happen when my father's billionaire CEO stopped mid-sentence, set down his glass, and walked across that crowded ballroom floor straight toward that old janitor. I promise you, my parents never saw it coming. And to be honest, even I didn't know the half of it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, the space where family secrets are swept clean, and the quietest people in the room finally get their say. Every week, we bring you stories about standing your ground against the very people who share your last name. If you believe that the people who actually raised you deserve the seat of honor, no matter what they do for a living, you are in the exact right place. Before we dive into how a simple seating chart blew a multi-million-dollar corporate family apart, do me a quick favor. Drop a comment below sharing who the anchor in your life is, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because trust me, this story does not end where you think it does. To understand why I fought so hard for a single chair, you have to go back to the summer I turned 7. That was the year my parents decided it was time to climb. My father, Richard Brooks, had landed a promising logistics manager role at Meridian Freight Systems, a massive trucking empire with a gleaming glass headquarters in Columbus. My mother, Linda, was launching her career selling luxury suburban homes. They told me it was just for a year. Just until we get settled, sweetheart. 1 year turned into elementary school, then middle school, then my entire childhood. While my parents built their pristine lives 70 miles away in Columbus, I lived in Dayton with my grandfather, Walter. Walter's house was small, but it smelled like fresh floor wax, cedarwood, and strong black coffee. Dinner was on the table at exactly 6 o'clock, regardless of how chaotic the world outside was. By day, Grandpa Walter was the head custodian at Garfield Elementary, the very school I attended. Every single evening, when he locked those heavy double doors of the school, he would say the same words to me. It was like a daily prayer, but one with a mop handle in it. Leave every room better than you found it, Hannah. He didn't just say it, he lived it. He said it when I accidentally spilled acrylic paint in the art room, and stayed late with him to scrub the tiles. He said it when I threw a softball through Mrs. Petty's window, and spent my entire summer weeding gardens to pay for the glass. He said it so often that the phrase integrated into my life, as steady and unnoticed as my own heartbeat. My parents drove down from Columbus every couple of months. To be fair, they never missed a birthday. But their visits didn't feel like family time. They felt like corporate inspections. Dad reviewed my report cards the way he reviewed quarterly freight logs, searching for any dip in productivity. And when they left, my mother would stand on the front porch, looking at Grandpa's modest, immaculate house with a very specific expression. She looked at his clean gutters, his perfectly straight fence, and the American flag by the door with the same cold eyes she used on a property listing she knew she couldn't flip. I didn't have a word for that look when I was a kid. I have one now, disdain. You see, love in my parents' home wasn't a feeling, it was a scoreboard. 1. Grades were points. 2. Colleges were regional qualifiers. 3. Job titles were the playoffs. When I was 22, I called my dad to tell him I had passed the civil service exam and secured a permanent mail carrier route in Dayton. It came with great benefits, a union, a pension, and honest, steady work on streets where people actually knew my name. My dad was silent on the phone for a long, heavy moment. Then, in that calm, chilling voice he uses when he's disappointed, he asked, "And you're actually happy telling people that's what you do?" He didn't yell. He never yells. He just quietly demoted me to the bottom of his internal scoreboard and moved on. My mother mailed me a high-end blazer for interviews, whenever you're ready to get serious. I wore it exactly once, to a funeral. But the strangest dynamic was how my father treated his own dad, Walter. He didn't argue with him. He simply erased him. When Dad was promoted to vice president of regional operations, and rented out a luxury steakhouse to celebrate. Grandpa Walter wasn't even on the guest list. I asked Dad about it during Thanksgiving when I was 25. His face went completely blank, like a security shutter coming down over a storefront. Some worlds shouldn't mix, Hannah, he said. That was his entire answer. It would be 4 more years before I finally understood exactly what world he was so terrified of mixing. And by then, the wedding invitations had already been printed. But what my father didn't realize was that his carefully constructed corporate world was built on a foundation he didn't actually own. And the secret of how Grandpa Walter was connected to the very top of Meridian Freight was about to slip out over a cup of diner coffee. Ethan Cole proposed to me right in the middle of my mail route, which is exactly why I love him. He teaches high school history, laughs at his own terrible jokes a second too early, and on a breezy Tuesday in April he was waiting for me at the final mailbox on Cedar Crest Drive with a little velvet box. I said yes before he could even finish the sentence. We wanted a beautifully simple wedding. A historic brick hall in Dayton, about 200 family and close friends, a local band, my grandfather sitting right next to me at the head table, and a honeymoon we could pay for in cash. Then came the engagement dinner, at my parents' house in Columbus. My mother set the table with the expensive porcelain that no one is actually allowed to enjoy. After the salad course, my dad reached into his breast pocket and slid a heavy white envelope across the table, like an executive closing a corporate merger. Inside was a check for $30,000. So the event is done properly, my dad said, offering a tight, controlled smile. My mother gently patted my wrist. Think of it as home staging, honey. Weddings are like high-end listings. Presentation is absolutely everything. I hesitated. I had spent my entire life managing my parents, translating their coldness for my friends, and smoothing over their rough corporate edges. A tired, weak part of me thought, just take the check. Keep the peace. You know how to handle them. So I thanked them. But I made sure to add, we will accept this as a gift, but not as a vote. My dad smiled and nodded just a fraction too quickly. And then, while my mother was busy refilling the wine glasses, he slid a second item across the table. A monogrammed leather binder. The exact kind he carries into quarterly performance reviews. Just a few thoughts, he murmured, on the guest list. I opened it, expecting to see long-lost cousins or old family friends. Instead, I found a corporate organizational chart. My father's guest list had 26 names on it, and I had never met a single one of them. Regional directors, 2 senior vice presidents, the head of Midwest Logistics, and at the very top, underlined twice in red ink, Raymond Whitfield, Chief Executive Officer of Meridian Freight Systems. Between the soup and the main course, my wedding had been systematically converted into a corporate networking event. It took me a week of quiet digging to realize why. Meridian's Senior Vice President of Global Operations had announced his retirement. The seat was currently empty, and my father had spent the last 20 years positioning himself exactly one step below it. My wedding was the only venue where he could put his CEO, a live band, and his own last name in the same room and call it family values. So I did what I always did. I managed it. I surrendered the local folk band I wanted because my mother claimed fiddles read as a county fair. I gave up my local florist for a luxury vendor she preferred. I told myself these compromises were small, that peace was worth more than centerpieces, and that I was protecting the things that actually mattered. Ethan watched me negotiate away piece after piece of my own wedding, until one night he looked at me and said softly, "Hannah, you keep calling it their event." I tried to laugh it off, but the very next evening, the final seating chart arrived in my inbox. My mother had emailed a color-coded, professionally rendered map of the ballroom. The Meridian executives were fanned out around the dance floor like a security detail. I found Ethan's parents placed at a small side table near the exit. I found my college roommate relegated to a table near the restrooms. And then, I found my grandfather. The man who had raised me, who had taught me how to ride a bike in an empty school parking lot, was assigned to table 14. It was tucked into the far back corner, directly next to the kitchen doors, completely hidden behind a massive concrete pillar, where the wedding photographer's lenses couldn't possibly reach him. I called my mother before I even finished scrolling. I kept my voice perfectly level. Level is the only frequency that works with Linda Brooks. Grandpa raised me, Mom, I said. He sits at the head table. My mother let out the slow, dramatic sigh she usually saves for homebuyers who demand granite countertops on a laminate budget. Sweetheart, she purred. The head table is strictly for the bridal party and the active hosts. And since we are hosting, it's just cleaner this way. Cleaner. I wrote that word down on the back of an envelope just to stop it from echoing in my head. When I drove over to Grandpa Walter's house that night, he was in the backyard, oiling the squeaking hinges of his screen door. In Walter's universe, a squeaking hinge is a personal moral failure. I told him about Table 14. I was fully prepared to be furious for both of us. But he just wiped his grease-stained hands on the old red rag he always keeps in his back pocket and smiled. I've sat in far worse seats, kiddo, he said softly. Don't go burning down your family over a chair. That was the thing about my grandfather. He was 78 years old, and I had never once seen him fight for his own dignity. I used to think he just didn't know how. It never occurred to me that a man could be so absolutely sure of his own worth that he didn't need a public vote on it. Before I left his house, I noticed his one good navy suit hanging on his bedroom closet door, fresh from the dry cleaners, with his brown leather dress shoes polished to a mirror shine underneath. Once a year, every single year since I was a little girl, Grandpa Walter would put on that exact suit and go downtown for what he casually referred to as his annual pension meeting. He was gone all afternoon that Thursday. When he returned, he had a high-end silver ballpoint pen tucked into his shirt pocket, elegantly engraved with a tiny Compass Rose logo. I remember thinking it looked incredibly expensive for a simple pension office. But I didn't ask. I should have. Because that Compass Rose wasn't a standard pension logo. It was the exact corporate seal of Meridian Freight. And the real reason Grandpa Walter went downtown in his finest suit once a year was about to turn my father's corporate ladder into a pile of ashes. If you want to understand why my father is the way he is, you have to look back at a school cafeteria in 1984. I only know this story because of my Aunt Carol, Dad's older sister. Over coffee a few days later, while she was trying to gently persuade me to be flexible with the seating chart, she let the truth slip. My father was 12 years old. Grandpa Walter was the head maintenance man at the old Harlan trucking depot back then. And in a town that size, every kid at school knew it. During lunch one afternoon, a table of boys whose fathers wore expensive suits decided to have some cruel fun. They took a dirty cleaning rag from Walter's janitor cart, soaked it in the water fountain, and walked over to my father's table. They dropped the dripping, filthy rag directly onto my father's lunch tray, ruining his food. One of the boys leaned in close and sneered. Looks like your dad missed a spot. The entire cafeteria erupted into laughter. Carol told me my father didn't say a single word. He stood up, walked all the way home, threw his ruined lunch tray at Grandpa Walter like a criminal accusation, and begged him to get a different job. Any job. Just one that came with a desk. But Grandpa, who had a heavy mortgage, 2 young kids, and a wife whose health was beginning to fail, said the only thing he knew how to say. Honest work is work, Richard. Carol swore to me that my father never forgave him for that sentence. He spent the rest of his youth mowing lawns until he could buy clothes that no one could ever laugh at. He became the first Brooks to graduate from college. He has spent 40 long years making absolutely sure that no one could ever drop a wet rag on his tray again. Sitting in that coffee shop, my heart ached for that humiliated 12-year-old boy. But then I reminded myself, that boy was 54 years old now, and the man he was currently trying to hide behind a concrete pillar was his own father. That Sunday, my mother sent a text. Family meeting at our house. We need to align on the wedding run of show. My father's family meeting featured a fully prepared slide deck. I wish I were exaggerating. I sat at their pristine $4,000 white quartz kitchen island, while my father clicked through a presentation titled Brooks Cole Wedding Run of Show. Meridian's signature Compass Rose logo was faded into the corner of every single slide like a corporate watermark. We went through the timeline, the approved photo backdrops, and then came the second-to-last slide, presented in a clean, clinical corporate font. Seating optics. My dad set down his presentation clicker, and looked at me with the exact expression he uses when evaluating an underperforming shipping terminal. Raymond Whitfield will be seated precisely 14 feet from the head table, my dad explained. Every director in the region will have a direct line of sight to your chair. And right next to you, we would have a retired school janitor in a cheap off-the-rack suit. That is not the story this family is presenting on Monday morning, Hannah. That is the only story that matters. I looked him dead in the eye. Grandpa is sitting at the head table, Dad. My voice didn't shake, which I was incredibly proud of, because my hands beneath the counter were trembling. My dad stared at me like a balance sheet that refused to reconcile. Then he delivered the line he had clearly rehearsed in his head 1,000 times. People remember the mop, Hannah, not the man. My mother kept her eyes glued to her polished quartz countertop. I picked up my car keys and told them the seating chart was no longer up for discussion. As I walked toward the front door, my father's voice followed me, cold and clinical. Then you had better hope to God that nobody at that reception asks him what he did for a living. I sat in my car in their driveway for 10 minutes before my hands stopped shaking enough to put the key in the ignition. If you have ever had to explain to your own parents why the person who actually loved and raised you deserves a seat at your table, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one of them during my mail route breaks. And make sure you're subscribed, because what my parents did next at our rehearsal dinner still makes my blood run cold. Because my parents weren't done playing dirty. When they realized they couldn't intimidate me, they decided to bypass me entirely and rewrite the contracts behind my back. But they forgot one tiny detail. Who actually owned the venue? My mother doesn't argue. She campaigns. Within 48 hours, my phone was ringing off the hook. Aunt Carol called first, her warm, sisterly tone completely replaced with corporate talking points. Your father has worked 20 years for this VP seat, Hannah. 20 years. It's one single dinner. Your grandfather would be perfectly comfortable sitting somewhere quiet. Don't cost your father his entire career over a chair. I asked her if she remembered the cafeteria story she had just told me. She stammered, insisted that this was different, and then suddenly remembered she had a casserole in the oven and hung up. Even our local pastor received a friendly call from Linda Brooks, asking if he could streamline the family blessing to avoid any awkward moments. He told me about it with a dry, raised eyebrow and let the request die a quiet death. God bless him. By Friday, I saw the trap they were building. They weren't just fighting over a seating arrangement. They were gathering allies so that when I finally gave in, it would look like a mutual family agreement rather than a forced surrender. And the worst part? It was actually starting to wear me down. Then Ethan came home from his parent-teacher conferences and casually mentioned that his mother had received a phone call from mine. Apparently, my mother had some gentle suggestions regarding the volume of the groom's side of the family and a few changes to the rehearsal menu. Ethan's parents are retired public school teachers. My mother was treating them like an underperforming property listing. That was the exact moment I stopped compromising. That Sunday, Ethan's parents hosted us all for dinner, including Grandpa Walter. They had sent him a formal, handwritten invitation in the mail, because Nancy Cole firmly believes in the dignity of a postage stamp. I watched my grandfather walk into a home he had never set foot in before, and be treated like royalty. Ethan's father wanted his expert advice on a sagging roof gutter. His mother begged him to retell his famous story about surviving the blizzard of 1978. Within 10 minutes, the kitchen screen door started sticking, and Grandpa had it completely fixed using a screwdriver he kept in his truck. Nobody was embarrassed of him. Nobody apologized for his presence. And as I sat there holding a dinner roll, I realized with a painful sting that I had never once seen my grandfather look that relaxed at my parents' table. Not once in 22 years. On the drive home, Ethan asked the one question he had been holding back all evening. What are you going to do about the father-daughter dance, Hannah? I stared out at the dark highway. Tradition is tradition, I whispered. You only get one dad, Ethan. He let the silence hang in the car for a long moment before speaking. And who actually taught you how to dance, Hannah? I didn't answer him. I couldn't. The real answer was a modest kitchen in Dayton, a crackling transistor radio, and a 60-year-old man patiently counting 1, 2, 3 while an 11-year-old girl stood on his shoe tops, crying because her parents had just canceled another weekend visit. The very next morning, my mother called to discuss the final dress fitting and read off the photographer's schedule. It took me until the very end of the list to realize there was a glaring omission. My grandfather's name was not on the family photo list. That missing name was the final straw. That same afternoon, I discovered exactly what my parents' $30,000 check had actually purchased. I called our caterer to request a minor change to the fish course, only to be met with a long, confused pause. "Oh, we'll need Mrs. Brooks to sign off on any changes," the caterer said. "She is the official signer on the contract now." My mother had quietly gone behind my back, upgraded the entire catering package, and resigned the contract in her own name using their money. She had done the exact same thing with the photographer, adding a corporate coverage package to focus exclusively on the Meridian executives. It wasn't outright theft. It was something much cleaner. Whoever signs the check decides the rules. My mother had applied her real estate philosophy to my life, and I had let myself become the property. I sat at my kitchen table with every single piece of wedding paperwork I had. I sorted through them the way I sort mail, ruthlessly. 1. Florist contract? Signed by them. 2. Caterer? Signed by them. 3. Photographer? Signed by them. And then, at the very bottom of the pile, I found the contract for Marigold Hall. It had been booked 11 months ago, and the deposit had been paid directly from my personal checking account. There was only one signature on the dotted line: Hannah Brooks. My parents had bought the flowers, the food, and the pictures, but they did not own the room. So, I decided to give them their money back. Every single penny of it. And when my mother realized she no longer held the financial purse strings, she did the unthinkable. She went to the venue itself to destroy my grandfather's presence. 2 days before the rehearsal, I drove to Columbus. I walked into my parents' kitchen and placed a thick white envelope on their pristine white quartz island. Inside was their $30,000 check, completely intact, undeposited, and 3 months old. Next to it, I laid a single typed sheet of paper detailing everything I was canceling: the luxury catering, the corporate photographer, and the high-end florist. I kept only what I had paid for myself, Marigold Hall, and my promises to the people I loved. My father stared at the page, as if it were a corporate liquidation notice. My mother looked at the return check like a death certificate. "You can't afford this wedding on your own," she said coldly. "Then we will have the wedding I can afford," I replied. Which is exactly how weddings used to work when they actually meant something. That night, I sat at my own table with an $11 calligraphy pen I'd bought at an art store. I hand-lettered every single place card myself. And I saved his for last. In my very best, most careful script I wrote: Walter Brooks, head table. I set it upright on the windowsill above my kitchen sink. For 2 weeks, that tiny tent of paper stood there like a fence post. I would look at it every morning while my coffee brewed, and then I would go out and deliver my mail. On Thursday, my father left an 11-second voicemail. His voice was completely flat. "You are embarrassing us in front of the most important people in my life." He didn't even realize what he had just admitted. He had ranked his CEO above his own daughter. The rehearsal dinner arrived. We walked through the ceremony beautifully. Grandpa Walter stood at the back of the aisle in his simple cardigan, holding my elbow with the perfect, steady pressure of a man who spent his life carrying fragile things and knew exactly which ones not to drop. But as the wedding party began eating lemon bars in the vestry, my father tapped my shoulder. "Hannah. A word. Family only." They cornered me in the small church dressing room. My mother held a fresh, color-coded printout of her seating chart, acting as if the last month of arguments had just been a silly misunderstanding. "We are asking you one final time," my dad whispered, keeping his voice low so the wedding party wouldn't hear through the thin wooden door. "Move Walter off the head table. Raymond Whitfield will be sitting 14 feet away. There will be press. There will be cameras. He is a retired school janitor, Hannah. He embarrasses us." And then, my mother did the most heartbreaking thing of my entire life. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out the hand-lettered place card I had set up at Marigold Hall earlier that afternoon. She had gone to the venue behind my back, searched the head table, and stolen his card. She held up that little piece of paper with my handwritten calligraphy, and she crumpled it. She didn't do it out of anger. That is the detail I will never be able to forget. She did it absently, the way you crumple a piece of junk mail, while smiling. "We'll have it professionally redone by the calligrapher," she said smoothly. "It will look much more intentional." The paper made a dry, crushing sound in the quiet room. And standing right there in the open doorway behind them, holding 3 lemon bars on a paper napkin he had brought in for us to share, was my grandfather. He had heard every single word. I watched his shoulders rise and his spine straighten, one vertebra at a time, like a flag being hoisted up a pole. Nobody said a word. Grandpa Walter quietly set the napkin of lemon bars down on a table, offered a gentle, reassuring smile, and said softly, "I'll wait for you in the truck, kiddo." It was the word kiddo that broke the dam inside me. The absolute, unshakable steadiness of it. A 78-year-old man comforting his granddaughter while his own son stood 10 feet away, calling him an embarrassment. Something inside me went completely quiet, cold, and organized. I stepped directly past my father, reached into the trash can, and retrieved the crumpled place card. I smoothed it out against my knee, crease by crease, taking my time, letting the dead silence of the room stretch out. Then I looked at my parents. "The seat is his," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity I didn't know I possessed. "And he isn't just sitting at the table, Dad. He is the table. He is the only reason this family has a roof over its head at all." My dad started to speak, but I cut him off. "If you want to walk out of this church tonight, that is your choice. But if you show up on Saturday, you come as regular guests. No VIP seating, no photo schedules, no corporate optics. You tried to buy a better version of this family for $30,000. And when I handed that money back, you tried to spend your own father instead. The version of us you want to show your CEO is not for sale." I looked past them. The dressing room door had drifted open, and the entire wedding party was standing frozen in the hallway, lemon bars halfway to their mouths. My parents had always taught me that an audience changes behavior. For once, their own lesson was working against them. My father slowly buttoned his suit jacket, the unmistakable habit of a man ending a meeting that had completely collapsed. "Then enjoy your potluck," he said. They walked past the pastor, past the wedding party, and out of the church. The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them with a booming sound that felt like a judge's gavel. But my parents did show up on Saturday. Not out of love, but because Raymond Whitfield had RSVP'd yes, and they couldn't afford to be absent in front of the CEO. They expected a quiet, embarrassing wedding. What they got was a masterclass in who actually owned the empire they had been serving. The Saturday of my wedding was one of those perfect, crisp October afternoons in Ohio. And my parents were there, sitting in the third pew, dressed flawlessly, sporting the identical smiles they used on their real estate flyers. Their decision to attend had solidified exactly 11 minutes after the regional office group chat caught wind of the CEO's RSVP. They had come for the audience. But I stopped looking at them the moment my grandfather took his place beside me. He was wearing his one good navy suit, pressed to razor-sharp creases, and his brown leather shoes shone like glass. The ceremony was brief, beautiful, and deeply true. And at 5 o'clock, as the golden hour light flooded Marigold Hall, our venue manager gently tapped my shoulder. "Mrs. Cole, Mr. Whitfield's car has just arrived." My father intercepted Raymond Whitfield at the coat check, immediately launching into what I can only describe as a corporate safari. He began guiding the CEO from director to director, his wine glass serving as a prop he never actually drank from. And 14 feet away sat the table I had paid for. Our head table. At my right hand was my grandfather, sitting proudly behind his wrinkled, crease-scarred place card. I was watching the room when I noticed the sudden shift. Raymond Whitfield had stopped listening to my father mid-sentence. His eyes had drifted past my dad's shoulder and locked directly onto our head table. He squinted, the way a man does when he recognizes a familiar face from a lifetime ago. "Excuse me for just a moment," Whitfield said. Leaving my father standing alone with an unfinished story, the CEO walked straight across the ballroom floor. Table by table, the chatter died down like falling dominoes. My mother's eyes darted across the room. My father stood frozen by the coat check, his hand still shaped for a shoulder that was no longer there. Whitfield stopped directly in front of my grandfather. Grandpa Walter calmly set down his fork, wiped his mouth with his napkin, and looked up with the serene face of a man who had been expecting this exact arrival. Raymond Whitfield, the leader of 12,000 employees, buttoned his jacket, stood perfectly straight, and extended both hands in a warm, respectful clasp. His voice carried effortlessly to the furthest corners of the silent room. "Welcome back, Founder Brooks." I watched that sentence sweep across the room like a sudden storm. Founder Brooks. My father's face went completely white. Not pale, but a bloodless, waxy white. It was the face of a man watching 40 years of pride and corporate calculations disintegrate in a single second. My mother's practiced smile remained frozen on her face while her eyes frantically searched for an exit. My grandfather firmly shook Whitfield's hand and smiled. "Raymond, you're interrupting the salad course." The billionaire CEO laughed like a delighted schoolboy, asked if he could join the table, and sat down right next to Miss Dorothy, who calmly poured him a cup of black coffee. Then Raymond Whitfield stood up, raised his cup to the room, and gave my guests a 60-second history lesson that you won't find in any corporate brochure. In 1988, Whitfield explained, Harlan Trucking was 90 days away from total bankruptcy. A quiet depot maintenance man whom nobody had ever bothered to ask stayed late one night and completely redrew our entire regional routing system on the back of brown packing paper. His design, hub-and-spoke load consolidation, became the exact skeleton of everything this company runs on today. Dale Harland had the wisdom to listen. That maintenance man became our silent partner. And in 1996, when we restructured as Meridian Freight Systems, he sold his active shares back, retained a 40% holding stake through a private trust, took the title of Chairman Emeritus, and requested only one thing: that his name be kept entirely out of the spotlight. He wanted a self-made story for the public, and Walter wanted to go home to his granddaughter by 6 o'clock. Every single year, I sit down with him for our annual meeting. And every year, he reminds me that every route our trucks run was drawn by a man whom everyone in the building walked past for years without ever truly seeing. The silver pen with the compass rose. The annual pension meeting, in the good Navy suit. The blueprint tubes in the hallway photograph. The locked drawer in his roll-top desk. Every single unexplained puzzle piece in my memory aligned in a matter of seconds. Within 10 minutes, my parents had migrated to the head table, suddenly trying to act like they had been Walter's biggest supporters all along. My father pulled me into the corridor, his face urgent, pleading. "Hannah, you have to help me fix this. Tonight, before Ray leaves, talk to your grandfather. Tell him about the VP seat. He listens to you. And after that, sweetheart, we can put all of this behind us. Clean slate. We're a family again." For 22 years, I had desperately wanted my father to look at me with that exact warmth, to call me sweetheart, in that loving voice. And it had taken a billionaire's validation to finally teach him how to say it. I looked back into the ballroom at my grandfather, who had returned to quietly eating his salad. I felt that old, familiar childhood instinct rise up. The urge to be the fixer, the translator, the good daughter who kept the peace. All I had to do was step in, play the mediator, and exchange the seat of honor my grandfather had never demanded for the promotion my father had never earned. I let out a slow breath. "No. That. Iwis parat. You wanted a better table." He built the entire room. I walked back into my reception, leaving him standing alone in the hallway with his clean slate. I walked straight to the DJ booth, moved the schedule forward, and took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen." My voice echoed clearly through the hall. "It is time for the father-daughter dance." Every head turned toward the hallway, waiting for my father to step forward. But I walked the opposite way. I walked past my mother's frozen expression, past the stunned corporate tables, and stopped right in front of Grandpa Walter. I held out my hand, palm up. "You've walked me through everything else, Grandpa," I said softly. "Walk me through this one too." Gloria didn't play the song on the schedule. She played What a Wonderful World on that old upright piano, slow, simple, and honest. My grandfather danced the way he lived. Small, steady steps, counting the beat under his breath out of old habit. 1, 2, 3. And in that moment, I was 11 years old again, standing on his shoe tops, crying tears of absolute gratitude onto a navy lapel that smelled of cedar wood and shaving cream. In that dance, I finally understood something that had taken me 29 years to learn. Belonging isn't a wage you earn through performance reviews. It is a gift, or it is nothing at all. When the song ended, my grandfather raised his water glass to the room and said, "To my granddaughter, who never once asked what a person was worth before she loved them." By the time the applause subsided and the reception lights came back up, the 2 seats my parents had taken at table 6 were completely empty. They had slipped out into the night. We cut the wedding cake without them. It's been 3 months since that night, and since I sort mail for a living, I like a completely clean ledger. The Monday after the wedding, Grandpa Walter took me to our favorite local diner and offered to establish a trust fund for Ethan and me. I told him no. The money was never the point of Walter Brooks, and I wasn't about to let it become the point of us. I kept the only 2 things that actually mattered: that final dance and our regular Sunday morning breakfasts. He did do one significant thing with his wealth this year. He established the Ruth Brooks Scholarship Fund, a full-ride college scholarship awarded annually to the children of the school district's custodians, cafeteria workers, and bus drivers. He made the board promise never to put his face on any of the plaques. My father wasn't fired from Meridian Freight. That's not how the corporate world works. He still parks in his designated spot every morning, working exactly 1 step below the executive seat he will likely never occupy now. The story of the rehearsal dinner and the crumpled place card made its way through the corporate ranks. It turns out, my father was entirely correct about one thing: optics are everything. He sent me an email in November. Just 2 sentences with no subject line: "I didn't know." That's not an excuse. I haven't replied yet. My grandfather and my therapist both agree on one key truth. I don't owe him an answer on anyone's schedule but my own. The door to our relationship isn't locked. It's just no longer my job to stand there holding it open for him. My mother sent us a beautiful crystal picture frame for Christmas. Inside it, I placed the photo Ethan's cousin took from the edge of the dance floor. A retired janitor in a navy suit, laughing mid-turn, with a bride on his arm looking up at him as if he owned the entire room. Because the truth is, he always did. Dignity is never the title printed on your office door. It is the grace, the love, and the respect you leave behind in every single room you are trusted to clean. Thank you so much for staying with me through Hannah's journey.